And this is the first time that they found that only an Indian entity was able to deliver the operational ask of the forces. So it is not because of us being Indian that we won the contract, but it is because actually everybody else failed in operating in the kind of environment they posed. See, imagine.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 395. I just returned from an amazing trip to Rio de Janeiro, and I'm catching up on some new interviews. Today's podcast is a replay of a conversation that I had with Ankit Mehta, CEO and co-founder of IdeaForge, about a year ago. IdeaForge was founded in 2007 with a mission to bring cutting-edge unmanned aerial systems to industries such as defense, security, and infrastructure. Over the past decade, the company has emerged as a pioneer in the Indian drone industry, with a focus on innovation, reliability, and safety. IdeaForge is a pioneer in the UAV industry and has multiple IPs to its credit. One of the key factors that sets IdeaForge apart from its competitors is its focus on indigenous design and development. The company's drones are designed and manufactured entirely in India, which has helped it establish a strong foothold in the domestic market, while also making it an attractive partner for global clients. At IdeaForge, Ankit is leading the charge to deliver cutting-edge technology that is made in India and second to none. One of the innovations is the Switch UAV, a first-of-its-kind VTOL and fixed-wing hybrid UAV. Switch features advanced flight time, higher safety, and simple operation with additional fail-safe redundancies. It is used for long-duration operations, long-endurance surveillance, and security inspection and photogrammetry. It is so good the Indian Army selected the Switch above all others to strengthen its unmanned presence. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Ankit talks about IdeaForge's journey, its approach to innovation and R&D, and its vision for the future of drones in India and beyond. We'll also discuss some of the challenges and opportunities facing the Indian drone industry and the role that IdeaForge hopes to play in shaping its growth and development. But before we hear from Ankit, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share on a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's find out how one drone company is rising to the top of the Indian market with this replay of an interview with Ankit Mehta of IdeaForge. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Ankit to introduce himself.
Hey, so Randy, I'm Ankit Mehta. I'm the co-founder and CEO of IdeaForge. I sort of founded IdeaForge along with my three other co-founders pretty much straight out of college. We've been building drones since 2004, and the company is about 14 years old. We started in 2007.
Ankit, tell us about IdeaForge. What does the company do and the type of services it provides?
IdeaForge is a drone original equipment manufacturer which builds high-performance, autonomous, and reliable drones for primarily surveillance and mapping applications.
A 14-year-old company. That's a long time in this industry. What were the main objectives when the company first began?
Actually, when we started the company, we weren't doing drones as such. we were actually doing something very different. We used to build these alternative energy chargers for portable electronics for off-grid survival of these electronic devices. Mobile phones had just started to take in the rural parts of our country, but electricity was still not penetrated enough. So that's what we actually started with. But since we had started building drones in 2004 onwards, we actually were doing certain projects for sustenance with our alma mater and our aerospace department in IIT Bombay. And while doing that, till 2008, we were largely meandering around with the technology, enjoying the fun of building drones of these projects that we were part of. But two events happened in 2008. One was that there was this competition that was held by Indian Army and Department of Defense US, where it was held in Agra, and we were participating alongside IIT Bombay, and IIT Bombay and MIT shared top honors for the hovering category there. And it was a platform that we had built from scratch. So that really started to push us into the direction of doing a lot of drone related activities. And then in 2008, when the terror attacks happened in Mumbai, is when we realized that we could have done something meaningful to contribute to the situational awareness when those events were unfolding themselves. And that's how we decided that we'll actually properly get into building drones for surveillance use cases. And 2009, we launched our first fully autonomous micro UAV drone. And since then, we've been delivering these systems for primarily surveillance and recently for mapping applications in a big way as well.
Looking back to that situation in Mumbai with the terrorists, how would you have approached that situation had you had drones?
The thought process there was that we were hearing a lot of news about the terrorists being holed up on the fourth floor, on the fifth floor, and occupying the third floor in some other building. So essentially, the situational awareness when you are outside is very poor when people are holed up at that height. And you had naval choppers trying to get a live feed of what they can see from that height and all of that. So directly, we could imagine that our drones would have been able to get a view of what is happening on those floors from an outside in perspective, and maybe go a level further and actually be able to locate a few people if possible, right? The kind of buildings they were in, they had some galleries and other things. So it could have been useful in that kind of a situation where, from ground, you really can't see what is happening at that kind of an height without putting people in danger or deploying something as massive and again full of risk and being very obvious like a chopper.
Have you been successful in reaching that surveillance and safety market?
India particularly, and we are largely present in India today. Our systems have essentially been deployed pretty much all of our defense forces and almost all of our homeland security forces, including they've been deployed by several state police forces for crowd management, disaster management, terror management, counter-terror operations, counter-insurgency operations, for essentially most of the use cases that typically drones are used for in surveillance. Our drones have been deployed and are actively deployed on a daily basis for those use cases.
In general, how are your clients using the surveillance drones?
A lot of businesses in India are using them for perimeter surveillance, particularly where there are large industrial houses or when people have slightly porous perimeters around their large installations. Our systems are deployed for various use cases for those enterprises as well, including some of the government enterprises, but several private enterprises as well.
What factors do you feel have contributed to the company's success?
There's an adage in IdeaForge, Randy, which goes like, we build it like a bird and we test it like a tank. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because from day one, our focus has been on building very high performance platforms, as well as to make them as reliable as we can, and also being capable of operating in the kind of terrain we encounter in India. So if you look at India, India has perhaps the highest, operating battle range, as well as it has marine environment, desert. It has some of the coldest environments at high altitudes, that too, while also having some of the hottest environments out there, right? So essentially, when you try to build something that can operate in all of these terrains, we ended up specializing in vertical takeoff and landing systems because that was also one of the needs of those situations. While you have to manage the environment, you have to also manage the terrain. And therefore, we focused on vertical takeoff and landing. And that has allowed us to essentially build a suite of products which is top of their class in terms of performance and reliability globally. And we are able to deliver that kind of flight times that people claim is typically up to a certain flight time. You'll find that most people claim their endurance and range, which is up to a certain number. Whereas typically our quote is we will give more than the number we are quoting, and our number is actually higher than the number that people quote for being able to deliver the performance up to. So essentially, we focus on delivering the minimum performance that we promise, and we typically build our systems to be able to go above and beyond that while operating with full flexibility in most locations, including the other factor was that when we were building these systems were to go in the hands of people who are not that tech savvy. And because they are not that tech savvy, we had to ensure that they are easy to learn for those users, and they are more autonomous than usually you find drones with, where somebody has to hold a remote controller and try and maneuver or manipulate the UAV by looking at it. But for us, it's been from day one systems that can be operated from a GUI, and they don't require any manual controls at all in that one sense for operation. So you can essentially train somebody to deploy these drones very easily. We have trained 10 plus field operations people, soldiers who have been using our systems and have probably conducted over thousands of flights on our systems as well.
How autonomous are the systems?
I would not put them in the category of being fully autonomous from the perspective of being able to operate entirely without human intervention. But the key navigation features and the key safety features are all fully autonomous. No manual intervention is required for the system to essentially take care of itself in the air. Only guidance and focus is required on the application on hand, which primarily for us has been surveillance and increasingly mapping as well.
Tell us about the company's new drone, the Switch UAV.
Yeah, so Switch is a fixed-wing VTOL hybrid drone, which we particularly built, like I said, to ensure that our end users can operate these drones in any environmental condition. And therefore, it was meant to operate at almost any altitude in the Indian terrain and in almost any environmental condition. We have two versions of the same. One version is a very specialized high altitude version, which is capable of operating at 4,500 meters takeoff and do a lot more from there. And the other version is rated slightly lower, but still extremely potent and capable, but can be deployed anywhere, essentially, rest of the world. The platform can fly for more than 2 hours at mean sea level and be able to go more than 10, 15 kilometers. We test it for much farther ranges, but we will typically not claim those ranges because of the approach that we adopt at IdeaForge. But extremely robust, has been deployed for various practical operational scenarios in all of the environmental conditions that I was discussing with you about.
What are the key applications that the drone was designed to serve?
So this drone particularly was designed to serve long-range surveillance and large area dominance applications. It actually is purpose-built for surveillance only and is capable of essentially being deployed from a backpack and operate for ranges up to 15 kilometers or more and flight times up to 2 hours or more. And depending on the terrain, be able to do various specialized features like it has the ability to do airborne data relay, where one drone can hop its feed from another to receive on the control station. Its feed can be seen by multiple parties at the same time directly, which are in line of sight with the drone. And it can also beam its stream on the internet or intranet, depending on the way the customer wants to configure. using our proprietary streaming solution, which takes care of a lot of bandwidth issues at the last mile and therefore caters for bandwidth bonding and other such features as well. All of this done with secure communications.
So there's obvious military applications. Is the drone portable? I mean, can troops in the field carry it easily with them?
It's a large rucksack kind of a form factor, but you can actually carry it on your shoulders in the field and deploy it at the last mile. But as far as uses are concerned, any large area dominance, for example, if you look at forest fires, that's a use case where you want to really cover large areas because really a large part of it is uninhabited. So you want to look at dominating those areas and you want to be able to look at borders. You want to be able to look at certain specific defense use cases as well. But anywhere there is a need for large area dominance, this system is useful.
As I understand it, the drone will shortly be available on the market for users and clients. Who do you feel will be the first users of the system?
If you recollect, at the beginning of the year, IdeaForge had announced a large contracted pack from the Indian Army. So it's for that use case at high altitude that the system is going to be deployed for surveillance applications.
From the articles that I've read, the decision of the Indian Army to go with IdeaForge was a fairly significant step, not just because of the size of the contract, but because it was an Indian firm.
Absolutely. So capital procurement is a very challenging procurement in general, a very tough procurement regime to qualify under. And typically only much larger systems, of course, tactical and mail category drones were inducted from Israel in the Indian Army. And this is the first time that they found that only an Indian entity was able to deliver the operational ask of the forces. So it is not because of us being Indian that we won the contract, but it is because actually everybody else failed in operating in the kind of environment they posed. See, imagine they want operations from a hillside and they want the system to come back and land pretty much within a small 5 meter by 5 meter patch every time and still be able to deliver that high altitude capability. So pretty much no other system could actually deliver anything close to this capability. And that's the reason why they chose IdeaForge ahead of everybody else, including several companies from outside the country as well.
Nice to know that IdeaForge can compete well at that level.
It was a great joy for us and a big validation, actually, because this is something that we've been saying for a while, that when you build in India for India, there is a unique ability you get to survive and sustain and create for this environment, which is not like any other environment, particularly because of the high altitude and terrain conditions that we have here, right? Largely people have built fixed wing drones and have not really focused or specialized in vertical takeoff and landing systems, even for high range and high endurance applications. And that's where we sort of built our edge over the years.
Did the contract open up other opportunities for IdeaForge?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fun given the Indian defense a lot more confidence with respect to the capability in our country for these kind of systems. Number one. Number two, with a lot of pride, being able to project that, this technology at any level, right, in terms of technical capability can be built right from India, which is, I think, a huge source of pride for everybody. And now there is a lot of course, push and drive. And you've recently also probably seen the announcements about a lot other contracts that are also coming up in India for more use cases around swarming, around delivery. And that's what it has unlocked in terms of being able to bet on local talent for some of these capabilities.
What other UAVs does IdeaForge manufacture?
Switch is actually our latest and top of the line system in that one sense. But we've actually been building quadrotors for a really long while now. Our flagship quadrotor is a small sub 6 kg UAV that flies for more than 60 minutes, can go up to 15 kilometers range, and can actually do really large area dominance all on its own, operated from an even smaller backpack than the Switch, and can be assembled in the field with almost no time. and can do both surveillance and mapping. While Switch was focused on surveillance, our quadrotor, which is Netra V4, it's version 4 of our Netra series, which can actually do both surveillance and survey grade mapping as defined by the Indian Surveyor General.
What sort of service or support does IdeaForge provide to organizations?
IdeaForge is primarily providing the drones, the training on its drones for operating them, and after sales support. Data management for our platforms is typically because our platforms are capable of integrating with other VMS solutions, that gets taken care of at that end, or the user takes care of and most of the data dissemination part of it, because we are not plugged into most of the defense systems in that one sense, right? So right now it's used as a standalone device, but increasingly we are integrating it into some of their systems, like their VMS systems, command and control systems, and all of that. But when you look at mapping, right, again, the mapping workflows are that when you do survey grade mapping for our surveyor general, typically they do their own data management, data processing, and creation of land records. So that activity, again, they typically take care of, but we also partner with a lot of service providers who can do the end-to-end activity of land records creation or survey grade mapping as per our standards here.
Do you find that users today know the value of drones, or do they still need convincing or education?
In our parts, what we have seen is that until last year, right, drones were a good to have technology, and not everyone was very clear about its usability and applicability. But since the pandemic started, I think everyone started scrambling for a solution to become uncrewed. And because they were looking at everything uncrewed, drones became a must-have solution in their arsenal. So if you look at it now for law enforcement, at least, in general, it's become a must-have device. And you'll see that there is a lot of procurement happening by law enforcement in these parts as well. However, when you look at firefighting and other use cases, not so much yet, but we do hear that it is being extensively being used in the US and other countries. It will promulgate here as well progressively, is my sense.
How do the regulations in India play into the industry's growth?
So what happened was that India was really open, as every other country was in the very beginning when we actually started deploying drones here. But progressively, India became very restrictive. And eventually in 2021, at the very beginning, we came up with a set of regulations that essentially made it impossible to operate drones in our country. Like virtually impossible, because there's too much compliance requirements, which was probably very, very subjective and not operable. But they recognized, probably went extreme. And in a short time frame, almost in 4 or 5 months, they have overturned those rules and came up with new regulations, which are relatively more open. Now, in areas that are defined as green zones, up to 400 feet height or 200 feet height, depending on how far you are from the airport, you can actually operate drones without any prior permission.
So, what constitutes a higher restricted area?
By default, because the restrictions currently are emanating from airports. So depending on the structure of a city and critical installations in that city, for example, they will define certain areas as red zones, which will be critical installations and areas around the airport where flying cannot happen without permission from the central government. But apart from that, we expect that it will be relatively smoother going than otherwise.
Going back to the start of the company, how difficult was it for you to take the idea that you had and turn it into a real company?
It was difficult from the perspective that nobody got hardware businesses in that time in our country, particularly. Nobody really, knew or, wanted to sort of go after or invest behind hardware technology, because everything was software and software services, and still is to a large extent, honestly. So that way it was difficult. But from a operational standpoint, we were incubated in our alma mater, and we used to just walk out of our incubator, go to one of the small lawns in our academic premises, and just start flying, right? It was that simple. It was very simple. It was so liberating to not worry about anything else. And everyone around us was encouraging, right? So for everyone, it was like something entirely new, right? People had seen hobby flying, but they hadn't seen, this kind of flying anywhere else. So it used to be fun.
What have you learned over the last 14 years that you feel was pivotal to the company's success?
We were recently awarded the National Intellectual Property Award for patents and commercialization. I think intellectual property is super crucial because despite the environmental, regulatory conditions, and anything else, right? Despite all of that, what continues to build intrinsic value is intellectual property. I think people should differentiate very heavily on intellectual property because the only other differentiation, if that is not the differentiation, is money and price and cost. And that's really a losing battle with various geographies in the world that you don't want to get into, right?
How do you characterize the competition in the region where you're located? I mean, you've got some companies in other countries that are well known for drone manufacturing.
Randy, the way we look at it is that we have our niche when anyone is looking at really maximizing revenue from drone services, particularly for mapping and or surveillance to get the highest ROI, then we are the right product. We can help get people almost 50 to 60% more revenue in the same time as compared to any other platform out there, right? And that's primarily because we have very few restrictions on the platform. And these platforms actually deliver a very large and a very comfortable flight time for them to not get into a lot of management hassles of delivering those services. So what you will achieve by maybe 25 batteries on a small drone, you'll probably achieve with 5 on our one drone, right? So that's how stark the differences in terms of operational simplicity with our systems.
What should we know about using IdeaForge drones for mapping?
If I were to give an example, India is today conducting perhaps the largest mapping scheme in the world. They're looking to map all the 660,000 villages in our country under a scheme called the Swamitwa scheme. And they're going to provide property cards to almost 100 million families under that scheme. And our drones were qualified for delivering the desired accuracy and desired fidelity for that use case by the surveying authority of our country, the Survey of India. And large number of our drones are today deployed in service of that application, enabling the Survey of India to help provide property cards to these village people who are essentially currently not under any formal economic mainstream activity. So that's just an example of how we can enable scale and be able to cover really large areas. So one of the requirements there is to be able to map close to about 2 square kilometers in every flight from a height of about 120 meters and still be able to do very high accuracy mapping, which is really crucial for that use case. So that is something that we do, which is pretty much equivalent to what some of the other people provide by using hybrid systems or by using fixed wing drones. We are able to do that on a regular quad rotor, which implies that our operational envelope becomes significantly larger because we really don't get into takeoff landing constraints. We don't get into takeoff landing wind constraints. So it's easier to deploy us essentially in many, many environmental conditions. And since our systems are protected against a lot of environmental hazards, the system essentially takes care of itself when it's up in the air.
How about search and rescue and emergency operation support?
There are two aspects in any disaster or search and rescue situation. One is post-disaster, during disaster, and pre-disaster. So we help do pre-disaster mapping to certain organizations in India, where they can essentially map their topography to make sure that they're able to predict the kind of disasters that are likely to strike, particularly natural disasters. If you recall the Uttarakhand floods that happened in India, which killed over 10,000 people. Then during disaster, they use our surveillance cameras, particularly during the night, because that's when it's much easier to essentially operate, because during the day, mostly choppers are operating and that airspace sharing is not that perfect yet. between choppers and unmanned systems, but usually during night, choppers don't operate, and therefore drones can actually take field and try and locate survivors and be able to pinpoint their position, which can then be taken up either the next day or the same time by other ground operations or other heavy teams when they come into action the next day. So during mission, that's useful. And then, of course, post-disaster assessment of what the scale of the damage has been, and probably the next steps in terms of recovery can be planned on top of that.
Are there other applications that we haven't talked about?
Surveillance in general is a field where our systems are deployed today. For example, crowd management for any large gathering, disaster management, insurgency operations in remote areas, counter-terrorism operations in urban environments. Then traffic management is another use case where our systems have been used. In fact, it's really funny. Sometimes the systems are used for checking if the ground deployment is going as planned or not. Because a lot of times people find it challenging to maintain the planned ground deployment as well. So refocusing attention on areas which can be bottlenecks in real time, coordinating a lot of that activity, particularly by passing on that information to command and control centers. So those kind of use cases are really useful on ground as well. And in general, emergency response.
What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs?
I think it's very important to service a really large market opportunity and to also know that what is evidently large in volume may not be the only large market out there. This is my very popular example, which is that while the consumer market is potentially the largest volume market in this space, but when you have a drone going for $500 a pop, even 1 million devices sold only gets you $500 million of revenue, right? So the numbers and the market size are closely to be looked at for attracting investments particularly. And then secondly, like I said, IP is crucial, right? You have to have something which is differentiated and sustainable in the market. Otherwise, it will be very, very challenging to particularly move people's attention from looking at using the same consumer devices for every use case. Whereas when you go deep into applications, you build your own niche, which is very hard for consumer devices to displace, particularly when somebody is looking to scale their application.
What's the future hold for IdeaForge?
I think the key for us, while we remain focused on surveillance and mapping, is going to be integrating into systems that the end users have very deeply to make this a very, very integrated part of their workflow. I think that's super essential in the coming days because people are no longer just fascinated by looking at drones or doing drone operations. They just want results now. So increasing automation and increasing integration, I think these are the two themes that we will be pursuing at IdeaForge as well.
Is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
Randy, from our perspective, while we are here and we've been trying to build this ecosystem here in India, for us, I think it's the right time and the right space for us to start going to other markets and particularly look at specific underserved applications in countries like even the United States. And therefore, we are looking at go-to-market partners, investors, and other collaborators for us to be able to explore deeply on what can be done in that geography, particularly.
And for my final question, Ankit, what message would you like to leave regarding the drone industry?
I think the time for the industry is here and now. I think it's never been better with the war that broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh region. And the fact that that war was won because of drones in a very short span of time is a signal to the rest of the world that you cannot do without drones. And therefore, I think there's never been a better time in this world to be in this industry and to build really, really robust airworthy solutions and integrated solutions for various use cases. I think both the pandemic and these instances have been sort of a big shot in the arm for the industry, particularly globally.
That's it for episode 395 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Ankit Mehta of IdeaForge. I want to thank Ankit for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about IdeaForge or want to connect with Ankit, check out the webpage at ideaforge.co.in. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.